Hi everyone, and welcome to the 2017 CodeTalk series. The 2017 CodeTalk series is co-sponsored by ODTUG and IOUG and provided by Oracle Developer Advocates. Today's webinar is 10 Things About PL/SQL You Probably Don't Know, presented by Steven Feuerstein of Oracle Corporation and Sven Weller of syntegris Information Solutions. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please type them into the questions box and they will be addressed during the Q&A period. This presentation will be recorded and available to everyone through the CodeTalk page on the ODTUG website. So welcome Steven and Sven, and thank you both for being here today.
Thanks very much for sponsoring another edition of CodeTalk, ODTUG. So hey everybody, my name is Steven Feuerstein. I'm the Oracle Developer Advocate for PL/SQL. I am one of the most obsessed people when it comes to the PL/SQL language. I've written 10 books about it, been working with PL/SQL pretty much exclusively since 1993 or so. And I'm always happy to find other people who love PL/SQL just as much as me. And I like to share their experiences with the user community so that you know how many different ways you can take advantage of PL/SQL, leverage it, and enjoy it. So I've got today with me Sven Weller, who has been working with Oracle database technology for more than 15 years, probably not quite as long as me, but pretty long amount of time. He loves to do in-depth analysis of problems and find new ways to tweak SQL and PL/SQL to come up with interesting solutions, which is always a good thing to hear about. These days he focuses primarily on performance tuning and also rapid application development and, might I say, low code development with Application Express, one of my all-time favorite tools. So I asked Sven to join us today to share a presentation he published on Twitter and the internet recently, which is 10 PL/SQL things you probably don't know about. And we'll kind of use those as launch points into a conversation about PL/SQL, the state of the development world today, and what you as a PL/SQL developer might need to know to be successful. Welcome, Sven.
Hello, Steven. It's really nice to be here. I'm very honored to have this talk with you. And as you mentioned, I'm quite enthusiastic about everything about Oracle SQL and PL/SQL, and that's why I started this blog post of mine. I first had a blog post about 10 SQL things you probably didn't know. That was quite successful. And then I started this 10 PL/SQL things you probably didn't know. And that got your interest, and it got quite a good number of reactions as well. So I think we can share this with a broader audience and just go through the points and have a little chat about it. Yeah.
All right,
what you think
great.
about it and what the others might think about it.
Let's get started.
Okay, yeah, without further ado.
You can say a little bit more about yourself. That's okay. You didn't have to go right over that slide.
You already introduced me. That's okay. Let's go back. I'm also one of the CEOs of syntegris Information Solutions. We are a German-based company. We are doing like Oracle for development, professional project management around Oracle databases, starting from administration, consulting, individual programming, Apex programming, stuff like that. All in Germany, usually in the near Frankfurt, in the Rhine-Main area. If somebody wants to contact me, my Twitter handle is Sven at Oracle. The Oracle is not there because I'm with Oracle, but just I use this handle to talk about Oracle-based stuff, mostly SQL, PL/SQL things. And there's also the blog where the 10 PL/SQL things were already published. Okay, but let's go to the more interesting things. I had to look that up because PL/SQL is fairly old. So the first Oracle version was version 6. Which is like 1988. I personally started much later with that, but PL/SQL is quite an old language. And my opinion about old languages is they proved that they stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. So it's even more so for SQL, but even so for PL/SQL. If a language is that old, it just means it's reliable. It just means there are still so many people using it. There must be something important and something quite valuable in this language.
And one or two comments here. You're absolutely right. I did not invent it. I am not nearly enough of a computer scientist in any sort to invent a language or even keep developing it. Interestingly, when I first started using PLSQL, it was not in version 6 of the database. It was before that.
Okay.
Do you know where PLSQL was available before version 6? Where it first became available for developers?
It was in Forms. I worked in
Oracle
Forms that as well.
Forms 3.0, yes. Of course, this is really dating myself. But yes, so it first came out in the Rapid Application Development Tool, SQL Forms. And then it was actually embedded into the database, and where it really took power in Oracle 7, as you point out here.
Yeah, that's something I didn't know. I always thought it was first in the database, and then it was also used in Forms, because at that point when I learned, like, yeah, or when I worked with Oracle, it was already there.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been around a long time, and you're right. Just because it's been around a long time doesn't mean that it's not relevant. Java's been around as long as PLSQL, probably longer. JavaScript has been around for decades as well. And the question is, can people still use it to great advantage? And it seems like they can. So
absolutely. I think that the most important point is that PLSQL integrates so good with SQL, and SQL is has such a strong theoretical and mathematical background. And because of that, we will still use SQL in like 20 years ago. And PLSQL probably with that.
And what I like to tell people these days is that the most important usage of PLSQL is to build data APIs. So JavaScript developers, all the Python developers, everybody out there building these fantastic UIs need data. And they don't know SQL, and they're probably never going to learn SQL really well. What we should be doing is building really great APIs via PLSQL packages and REST APIs that expose that data and let the database developers make sure that the database is consistent, secure, and high-performing.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you with that, especially if you mention REST APIs. I think that's where the future is heading to. In the future's applications will be separated in layers, and the layers will be connected by REST APIs.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I am expecting.
All right, so it's still a great language. It's still something people should be using. Excellent. We agree. Big surprise.
Let's go, before we go to the next thing, like to number 9, I would propose to do like a kind of hackers challenge. Now for the audience, usually you probably know that Steven does these PLSQL quiz and the PLSQL challenge. And usually what one does there is you have a task, you have to find a way to like build code, and that quite matches what our usually development experience is. And I sometimes want to turn that thinking around. So what I would like to do is just show a small block of PLSQL, and the question would be, how can we make it not work? So, Steven, are you with me? Is that okay if we do that?
Yes, so how we can make our code not work. I love it. Interesting reversal.
Let me just throw this on the screen so that you can see the SQL, and the audience can try to, I think I have a second presentation here. I call this the Hackers Challenge. Yeah.
Hackers
Challenge. Challenge is, it's a very, very simple block of code, and the task is, you're not allowed to touch the code, but you're allowed to do everything else around, like change the system environment or something.
So we don't change the code. The code stays the same, and we make it.
We make it stop working. The code runs. I can show that this code runs. It will just print out. Today is the 21st of September, and to break this code could be different things. It could be make it produce an error message, or make it return a wrong or not usable value, things like that. So essentially, it resembles like you stumble across some other programmer's code and you look at it and you think, okay, what is that supposed to do, and is it really safe to use, and in which scenarios wouldn't it work?
And again, you're saying you want attendees to type in an answer through the question API, question chat box, and they should not propose changes to the code. The code stays the same. But what could they change around the environment that would cause it to break? Okay. Why don't you give us one example?
I beg your pardon?
Why don't you give us one example?
What I would like to do is, between each of the 10 points that we go through, I would like to present a different way to break this code.
Ah, okay.
So if the attendees are with us, they can check if they found the same solution, or I would be interested to hear if some of them found a new one which I didn't thought about yet.
Okay.
Or, and of course you as well, but let's see what the attendees come up with, and maybe somebody finds it. I can try to put this down into the chat box. Oh, I'm already going through it. Don't want to see that. Let me check if I can simply copy that so that you all have the code without having to type it. Let me quickly check if I can share this. Karen, are you with us? There was this.
Yeah, I think you can put something in the question area. Do you see the
Yeah,
questions?
no, at the moment not. That's the problem.
I tell you what, let's keep going.
Okay.
And not lose too much time on it.
We
So do you want people to come up with ideas now or as you go through the talk?
When we go through, they should come up with ideas. If anybody has an idea, they should type it into the question box, and they don't have to show the exact code, but just have a general idea what we can change to make this break.
So one suggestion came in already, which is to create a table of your own named dual.
Okay, good one. I'll come back to that later. Good try. Yeah, that's possible. Okay, let's start with the PL SQL things. Now, one thing I picked up pretty late when programming was that we can put labels in our PL SQL code. And this is something I really love to do now because it just documents certain points and it helps to define a certain block or a certain loops. I usually do this for every for loop I use. To put a label in front of it and to use the same label at the end of the code. The problem, what I didn't know or didn't realize fairly late, that the label that you put at the end of the loop just doesn't mean nothing. You can write anything there. Also at the end of begin end blocks or end loops and so on.
So they're like a sort of a form of comment.
Yes, yes. I usually use it as a form. I don't use it as a label to go to, or to jump to there. I only use it as a comment. It helps me see what kind of loop is ending there, especially if we have like a combination of several loops. Mm-hmm. It just helps to see where we are.
And you can name loops. You can also name anonymous blocks. You can give names to blocks. So if you have a nested block inside your code, you can put a label on the top of it and qualify variable references within the block with that block name.
Yeah, that's the checksum example here, the blue one. That would be a labeled block. I don't do that so often, but sometimes yes. Mostly I do it for loops. Mm-hmm. The thing is, you really have to watch out that you do it in a sensible way. Because, like here in the example, we have the block name checksum thing, and at the end it's named checksum, and this could be a little bit confusing.
Right. So it seems like the takeaway here is it has some usages, and in fact another usage of labels, so that you can go to a label. You can also continue. You can use the continue statement inside a loop, and you do that with a label as well. That's how you use the name of the loop. But don't depend on the end loop or end labels to be validated or do error checking by the PL SQL compiler.
Yeah, you can.
So better readability, some additional functionality, but don't depend on the end labels.
Exactly.
All right.
Just be aware that there could be a typo in it, or don't depend on it. Exactly. Now, since we have.
Now, is there a way to break that code with labels? I don't think this applies to the Hackers Challenge, right?
No. This doesn't apply to the headers chart. The things you probably didn't know is that the labels don't need to match, or at least I picked that up pretty late. I always thought they need to match, but they don't. Let's do this and then do some solution for the hackers challenge. There is a pragma serially reusable. This is some of the things where I think one should be aware of it, but so far I never had a use for that. So this pragma essentially tells us that the package state is only defined for while you're calling that package. So it's only for the call instead of the whole session. And I don't like this pragma, but it exists and we should be aware that there is something. What's good is it makes us aware that there's a lot of things going on when we load a package, like it instantiates, it reserves space in the user global area, and also we can reuse those resources as long as the session is running. That's a good thing.
The thing I like about the serially reusable pragma, in fact, I think I've used it once or twice in my coding life, so it's, you're right, it's not one of those commonly used features, is that it does remind us about the fact that packages can have state, which means you can assign values to variables, you can open a cursor, and that state persists in your session by default. And the thing that I think is most important about this these days is that we don't even want to depend on that package state generally with web-based applications, right? Because they're stateless environments. Perhaps you could talk about that aspect of serial reusable is almost like saying we're going to make this package act like it's going to act in the world out there when you're calling packages from the front end anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like if you have a single state only, so then it might be useful. I don't think we really should use it, but we should be aware that there's it might have a very special situation where it is interesting.
But I guess what I'm getting at is let's suppose I have a package that has an initialization section, so it actually runs code every time the package initializes it, which is something you can also do with packages. So it's not the reverse of serially reusable, but it is setting up this package state, and it might cost some amount of time. In the old client-server world, that was great. It would run once, it would be instantiated in your session, and you're done. But in the stateless world that we live in today with websites, that's not true. Right? You could have that initialization firing lots of times.
Yeah, it depends a little bit also if you get the same database session or if you get a different session, and you have to think about how to handle that one. So this could be something if you have your own connection tool and you don't know which session you get. Maybe you should do some serially reusable pragma just to make sure that the instantiation runs every single time.
There you go. A use for serially reusable. Excellent.
Okay, so let's take a step back to the Hackers Challenge. Let's just switch to the other presentation. And I can even show this probably. Or I have some case that I want to show. So when we look at the code here, I don't really like this. There's a lot of nasty stuff going on, even if it's so small. One of the most common problems, and usually one of the first things people notice, is that we have like a date variable, but we do like a to char. We change that sysdate, which is already a date, into a string, and write it again into a date. And here we print it out using it again, converting it to a string. And very often there are problems because of format settings.
In fact, that was another attendee just submitted the suggestion that changing the NLS date format can make the code fail. Exactly.
That's one of the points. In this specific case, it's not so easily done because here we always use the same formatting for converting. We are doing. First, we have to think about what kind of code is converted. We are doing an explicit conversion from date to char using the normal NLS settings, and we are using the same settings to convert again to date. So the only chance that this can break is if we lose some information during this conversion. If we have a format mask that has all the information that we need, like everything day, month, year, hour, minute, seconds, then we will not lose information at the end, it will not break. But there are some cases, correctly, you can alter the session setting some NLS things, and it will return, well, wrong values or strange values. And here are a few examples what you can do. You can use, essentially, you could set a date format which excludes like the day information,
right,
or the month information, especially the day. Because if we convert it back, then the day or the database will fill out the day with some default values, which is always the first. So we would get, if we use the first date format, we will get something back like the 1st of September. But there are also some other cases. So the first three are very similar. And the last two, or the last three are cases where I would say, it's not only the date format, there are some other language or NLS settings that we should be aware of. For example, we could change the calendar. It would still return the correct value, but there's a good chance that the user is not able to understand what it is. So, I'm not sure if somebody tried this out already, but I can quickly give an example. Let me switch to that. Oh, my favorite one. Now, here's the same code, and if I run it, it should, should do this thing. And if I do an like auto session set a calendar to what was it? I think Thai Buddha or Imperial.
HA, I believe.
Okay, wrong one. What did I type wrong?
Put an H in front of the A. Thai Buddha, B-U-D-D-H-A. No, keep going. Yeah, try that.
Okay, session is altered. And if we run the statement again, it returns the correct value, but most of us are probably not able to understand this value.
That's right. Interesting.
So it's not only a state format, which is changing our output, it's also things like NLS calendar or NLS language, which we should be aware of, that there could be changes in the session. It's not wrong, though.
And I think that the main thing to point out here is don't do implicit conversions. So the fact that you can write select to-car sysdate into V today, and V today is a date, and it's doing 2 or 3 different implicit conversions there, and we're just papering over it, is not a good practice. You want to make your you want to include your formats and make them explicit whenever possible.
So let me just put this calendar Gregorian, I think it is. Yeah, we should always be aware that there are conversions. Just let us see what the other case was, and then let's continue with the code. We want a state format. And here I use just a time. And run the code, and there we get the 1st of September. This is what I mentioned, because the day information is lost during the conversion. Oracle does a good job. It uses the current month and the current year, which is also lost, but the day is replaced by the 1st.
And you don't want to depend on the system to do that implicitly.
Exactly. That's because of the conversion, and because we are converting, well, essentially from character to date, and we have no influence about the character settings.
And as one of our listeners was just pointing out, in Thai Buddha, which I didn't realize, the year's different, so it's 2560 in the calendar. It wasn't just the month. the year number is quite different as well for the Thai Buddha calendar.
Yes. Yeah.
2050.
Yeah. That is quite surprising. You expect different characters, yeah, but that the year is totally different. That's really surprising. And if you use then this year somewhere else, it just is a mess. Okay. Let me switch back. So my cursor is gone, that's why I'm clicking on the book. There it is. Really fancy.
We're already at half past the hour, so we need to make sure.
Oh, okay. So we have to speed up. I have a problem that I can't see my cursor. Maybe we can talk. Go through the other ones. Well, I sent you the presentation as well. Maybe you can open it.
You can't move the console aside?
I don't have a cursor anymore. That's my problem.
That's very odd.
Yeah. Quickly check. I can revive it. Otherwise, I sent you the presentation. Otherwise, I suggest you can fire it up and maybe load it from your side. Okay, there's my cursor again. There's something messed up, but I'm switching to the other presentation, and then we go through that as well. Okay, sorry for that. Sorry about that. Now, one thing, and that is really something I fancy, is you can compile a package even while another session is using or is actively running that package or that procedure. That's not normal, but that's not what I learned at the beginning when I was working with PLSQL. If you have a long-running job and we try to compile the package that is used in this job, we can't do it. The solution here is we can do it if we are using edition-based redefinition. Essentially, EBR is a tool that allows us to have different versions of PLSQL code in the database. And we would be able to have something like, we have this long-running job, maybe some balance calculations at the end of the month. And we can prepare a new edition with new code, compile it there, see if everything is working for the same code that is running at this moment. And this is a total game changer for certain environments. This is a really, really nice feature. Unfortunately, it's not used enough, in my opinion. What do you think, Steven? Do you use EBR somewhere? Or? Still working?
My apologies, I was muted.
Okay.
So I was first asking you, do you have any clients who you've been using EBR with?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Great.
I would like to introduce it for more clients, and it's not so easy to make that work.
Right.
But
it's not a trivial thing, especially if you don't do it from the start of your application development. Certainly at Oracle, we use it for the eBusiness suite. I have not implemented it myself in the Oracle DevGym or PLSQL Challenge quiz site. I really should, but I'm busy doing other things. And we see more and more customers picking it up, and big customers. Salesforce is probably the biggest. They actually built their own EBR implementation in 10G, and they finally moved over to ours. But yes, it really is an amazing difference. You can aim for 0 downtime. You can apply new versions of code. Go ahead.
And you mentioned a certain very important point. I thought very long about this. What's the reason so many or not so many people pick it up? I think we don't have the time to talk this through, but what I would like to share is something. This is how we use EBR for one customer. Essentially, we don't wait for production, because usually you say we can do zero downtime upgrades with that. And that's awesome, but it's too late, in my opinion. We have to start working in development using EBR, because then you start getting familiar with that. And then you start using it in a regular basis. And what we discovered is, in our development environment, we are using EBR in a different way. We are having like 3 permanent editions, which is base, beta, and alpha. We are developing in alpha. We are doing nightly builds or nightly backups into a subversion, into our versioning system. And on the same nightly backup, we are playing this PLSQL version back to our beta edition. And what happens now is we can change everything in alpha, but on the same tables, on the same data, we can have users test already changes that we made. And that's really something that made us much more quicker for doing changes, or quicker to react to problems that the testers discover. Because first of all, we can use the same data, or we are on the same data set. And secondly, we have an automated way to provide them with the case all in the same database. It goes so far that we even could avoid having multiple test databases, where usually you do have one test database for your unit tests and another database for your integration tests. And we do this all in one. But my main point is, start using EBR at the beginning of the project.
And I think another point about EBR that's worth pointing out to people, because it can seem incredibly complex, and if you start to read the documentation, you read about reverse addition triggers and this, that, and the other.
Yes.
For EBR at this point, with 12.2 especially, and there have been enhancements in 12.1 and 12.2, simply using EBR with PLSQL objects. In other words, you're not additioning your data. You're not trying to implement zero downtime around adding columns and removing columns and things like that. If it's just PLSQL code, it is very straightforward, and it is something that I think a lot of us should be looking at.
Absolutely.
Always
this is what I call the complexity problem. These cross-addition triggers are a really nice thing, but we rarely need to use them. But when you read about EBR, you read about them, and then some people shy away because they seem so complex.
Right.
At the beginning, you don't need them.
But what I find most impressive about the screen is that you have automated unit testing there. Very, very impressive.
Well, I have to say it's not, the coverage for this automatic unit testing is not so high. But
just say thank
you. It could be better.
Always. It can always be better.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. These are some problems I identified. I don't want to, I think we don't have too much time with that.
Yeah.
But there are certain dilemmas and certain areas where I think we could avoid problems. And I'm planning to do or to publish something which I call the edition-based not only redefinition manifesto, where I talk a little bit more about this and how we can use EBR to avoid those, let's say, hurdles that are still there.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
Now, let's move on. This is something I learned from you. I'm not sure where I picked it up. I'm probably on Twitter or so. In 12c, we can now use table functions without the table operator.
It's a little thing.
Yeah,
but
it's a little thing, but it's nice.
But now we can tell people about table functions and pipeline table functions. What's so great about those, Sven?
Yeah, they are awesome. I use them quite a lot if I want to inject some complex code into a select statement. You can do it. You can use it for parameterized use, or for stuff that is easier to do in PLSQL than in SQL. Or if we have things like we have like a reporting environment that can work with SQL, but where you can't apply it to a PL/SQL function or procedure. And the pipeline table function just opens up all kind of possibilities to bridge those gaps.
So for those who aren't familiar, let's just go back a little bit. The idea behind a table function is that you create a function that returns a collection, a list of strings, a list of numbers, a list of record types or object types. And you put it in the from clause, with or without the table operator as of 12.2. And then the SQL engine will treat the data set coming back as if it were a relational table. So as Sven was pointing out, one of the reasons you might want to do this is you need to come up with a set of data. And you're trying really hard to do it in SQL. But you're not Tom Kite. You're not Connor McDonald. You're not Chris Saxon. You're not Maria Kogan, all the people currently on the Ask Tom Answer team, 2 of them on my team as developer advocates. It's amazing what they can do with SQL. But people like me, Sven, normal human beings, you can't always get it done. So you can fall back into PL/SQL, write some procedural code that builds up your data set in a collection, pass it back, and you get the best of both worlds.
I think it's so powerful because then you have just a tool where you can choose, okay, now I put it in PL/SQL. Probably I could do it in SQL as well, but very often if the code is in PL/SQL, it's better maintainable because the SQL tends to become very complex at a certain point. And in PL/SQL, you can keep certain steps, certain operations apart from each other, and it's very often it's much easier to make this code maintainable. Yeah. And so that's for me one point where I moved to PL/SQL.
2 comments about that. One is, in case you folks don't know about it, there's a with clause you can use in your select statements. You can actually build up small virtual tables inside the select statement and then use them, reference them. So you can actually sort of write top-down designed code in SQL, which makes it more readable. The other way that table functions I have found come in really handy is you can pass in lots of different parameters, a parameterized view, and then use dynamic SQL to construct your SQL statement. So you might still have the SQL statement inside, but it's a very complex construction process. And then you execute it with execute immediate, bulk collect the results, return them in the table.
Yeah, great.
Fun stuff. If you haven't used table functions yet, check them out.
Use them. Yeah, great. Okay, one more thing. This is also rarely used, but it has some important implications because I see often code where there's something like this here. We do a select statement where dummy equals dummy. Now dummy in this case is a column from the dual table. It could also be where name from like an employees table equals name. And if the parameter that we have is name, then we're comparing essentially the same column. But in this case, we want to compare to a parameter that is inputted or that is provided into the function. And to do so, we can use the function name in front of the parameter with a dot, and then it's clear for the statement that this is the parameter and it's not the column name. Most of the times I see people using, like, I do this as well, like p underscore dummy or p underscore name for parameters. And this is one of the reasons why people do this, is because to avoid those issues with having like the same name for different sources for value.
So in the formal language of the PL/SQL dev team, if you don't, there's a process of name capture. So the question is, who owns the name? And if you don't qualify references to variables, PL/SQL variables and parameters in your SQL statement, there's a danger that it could be captured by the SQL engine. So for example, you might even have p underscore dummy as the name of your parameter, because we want to make sure that that it's clearly a parameter. What if the DBA adds a column called p underscore dummy? Oh, big problem. Now, one other way this is really important, this qualification of names inside SQL statements, is that as of 11G, we support fine-grained dependency. So that the PL/SQL compiler will keep track not only that you reference a given table, but which columns you reference. And then when you have, what that will do is reduce the amount of times that your code will be invalidated as underlying tables change. And if you fully qualify every reference, not just my fancy function.dummy, but also the reference to the dummy column, and always use an alias and reference to qualify that,
Absolutely.
then you'll find that your code will not be invalidated as often.
I think one of my personal rules is always use a table alias, no matter what, just to avoid certain types of problems.
It's a good one. And by the way, I did have a question come up from our last topic, which was, what is a parameterized view? So a parameterized view is something that doesn't exist in Oracle database. There are some other databases that support it, but in theory, you would be able to say, select from the view and pass parameters into the view. Not supported right now in Oracle database. So you essentially get that same behavior with a table function. You also get some of the same behavior if you use system context values inside your views or inside your queries. So that's roughly speaking what a parameterized view could be. All right.
Okay.
11:42. Let's keep going.
Okay. This is probably something that got quite a few attention. I have to say, it was quite fun to build this. If you copy this code into SQL Developer, it just works exactly the same. So this is working code. Is there a use case for that? I tried to find really sensible names for that, but in effect, no, there is no really use case. It doesn't really make sense. It's too hard to use in SQL Developer, and other developers might not be able to really see that, because it is also depending on the font that you're using. So if you're using SQL developers, you need a special font for that, so that you can see all those emojis. Emojis work. You can use this for variable.
That's great. I hope I never have to look at this code and help anybody figure out what it's doing. But it's fun. Essentially, it just does an interval. It calculates like a starting time. It provides a random value from 1 to 6. This is where the
I'm
actually kidding. I think you actually can sort it out pretty well, yeah.
And then it just sleeps for like 2 seconds for every dice roll. It's just for presentation purposes, but it works.
Do not do this at home.
No, but it's fun. That's really fun.
And by the way, a couple of people have been asking about, is this being recorded? They're having some trouble hearing with their internet connection. It is being recorded. You will get an email from ODTUG announcing the URL, and you can follow Sven or myself on Twitter, and we'll make sure that we tweet it out as well. Keep
Absolutely.
going, Sven.
Feel free to contact us on Twitter, ask questions there, and I'll try to answer anything that you provide. Also, one thing I picked up recently, which I didn't use very much, but which could quite come in handy sometimes, is that you can put not null constraints on variables. If you declare them as not null, then anytime you try to set them to null, you get essentially you get an error message, which is written at the bottom.
At a presentation by
an index is null, something like that is useful.
At the recent Kscope conference, Bryn Llewellyn, who's the PL/SQL product manager, proposed that all your variables you should use not null all the time.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Declare everything as constants, and you create them in nested blocks. It was a very interesting presentation. Essentially, what I think the way to extend this topic is, if you know there are certain rules about your variables, about your data, put the rules in your tables as much as possible with check constraints and so on. And then put your rules into your code as much as possible. So if it really should never be null, say that it's not null. And that way, not only will you be able to find bugs more easily, but people coming along later will not be able to mess up as easily because you've set some constraints around how the code should work. And it's self-documented.
I suggest before we go to the next few things, we go through a few solutions for the Hackers Challenge. We only have 2 more things, and the next thing would be a spoiler for that anyway.
Okay.
So just switch to the other ones again. And we can see. Now, this session was messed up a little bit. The next thing we can do to break this code is we can manipulate the systate. not many people are aware of that, but we can do an auto system set fixed state, for example, to the 1st of January last year, and then sysstate will return us this value. And this value obviously is not today, so it would be like the wrong value.
And I can see this being very handy for testing.
Absolutely, that's the major use case for that. And you need, I think you need to be DBA to set this. Also to reset it to a normal value, I think you just have to set it to 1.
So you can't say alter session set fixed state. It can't be per session. It's for the system as a whole.
It's auto system.
Okay.
So don't do this in an environment where lots of people are really working on production, something like that. Do it in a certain specific test environment where you want to set fixed state. And it stays at that date. It's not like a normal sysstate which then goes up every second. It just is fixed to that point, which messes up some kind of tests, like performance measurements where you use sysstate to measure starting and end time. But that's one way to break this code. You could manipulate sysstate.
Now, why would it break the code to make sysstate a fixed value?
Because the code returns today is this day, but it's not. It's the day that sysstate is.
So the code would work, but it would return.
Yeah, the code would work. It would. Breaking means, for me, that's what I mentioned at the beginning. It could error out, but it could also be like return wrong or non-understandable values. So this would influence the code in a way that the developer maybe didn't expect. And the other thing that was already mentioned, we can manipulate the dual table. Now, what not everybody used or knows is that dual is a real table in the system table space. And in older database versions, it was even possible to insert values there. This is not possible anymore in 12c. So something like insert into dual, I think it was possible in 10G, not sure about 11G. But you could insert a new value there, and then every select that does a select from dual would, of course, get a too many rows value, too many rows error. So that's quite something to watch out for. You could also create a view that does something similar, that just represents dual, but has 2 rows, and then you get, again, too many rows error.
So I think one of the things I would take away from this is that when you select from dual, if you decide that you actually want to do that, and there are very few reasons for doing that today in PL/SQL. There used to be lots of cases where we didn't support things like basic functions in SQL, so you had to select from dual to get them.
Factor it out to some common package, and if you encounter issue, then you have at least one area where you can look at. It's something to be aware of.
No, what I was going to suggest, though, is that if you do run across it, or if you do decide to do it, qualify it with sys.dual.
Yes.
Then somebody else can come along and create a local table that overrides the sys.dual. And in fact, another best practice that Bryn Llewellyn recommends around all the built-in stuff, all the built-in packages, is never call, for example, dbms output. Always make it sys.dbms output. And that way you don't have to worry about somebody injecting their own dbms output package into your session through SQL injection. And
very good point. That's one of the next examples I can show.
And unfortunately, to me, it's one of those best practices that nobody's ever going to follow. We're not going to do it.
Yeah, sometimes I see code where they use sys.dbms output or so. I've seen, not for dual. In fact, there are PL/SQL versions where you can insert into dual or this view, and it just selects one value even if there are 2.
It doesn't matter, right? That's right.
So you already mentioned that we can manipulate also dbms output. So
I'm sorry, I stole your thunder.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it just shows you know what you are talking about. Let me just show this very quickly. I have this prepared. We have like the code we already seen. Yeah, it runs and it returns. Now we should set auto session back to something normal. So if we run the code, we get today is the 21st of September. That's right. What I'm now doing is I'm changing my edition. I'm changing now, I have here these 3 editions I talked earlier about. I'm changing this to edition alpha. And I run the same code again. Oh, it doesn't do it. I have to set it to... Okay, let me do this the other way. Here's a package where I override EBMS output. I just run this package and then copy the code to there and run it there. It's probably my session didn't work. Then execute it and see what happens. Make an error by compiling. The first thing we noticed, well, this also broke the code. It says DBMS output package does not exist because I made some.
Did you compile the package body as well?
I thought so. Ah, no. Now it is. Okay.
There we go. Yeah, so this is one of the more interesting aspects of SQL injection. People, if they get into your account, they can recreate any built-in, as long as they match the public API of the package spec. Your code will still compile, but it will be doing entirely different things.
Yeah. I can run this again. So essentially what the code does, it provides all the interfaces that EBMS output has, but it returns like some quotes that I have here in a random way. And in some cases even it returns the correct value. I have this on my, if you really want to go into it, you can check this out in on my blog post where I have the code just to see what it is and how it is working. The interesting thing that I learned is even the call to set server output on, which is in there, this already executes EBMS output.
That enable.
Essentially EBMS output enable, and it uses the same package.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
so that would be really confusing. So don't let people get into your sessions.
Absolutely.
Stop SQL injection at all costs. All right, we're coming up on the last few minutes.
Yes, we are almost through. Let's finish that. So we've seen that. We can also manipulate SQL+. That's a little bit on the strange side, I have to admit, but we can do something like set server output on, because we've seen, because of this set server output on, it's essentially a SQL+ session. If we could say format truncated and set line size to 10, and then everything we see on this EBMS output line is today is there, and then it just cuts off because the line size is only 10. Or if this is part of a script, we could put like wrong things in front of the script so that this code wouldn't even compile, like putting it in front of that. That's a bit on the, well I would say on the cheaty side. But one more thing I would like to mention is we can rewrite the whole select statement. And there's a new package in 12c which is called EBMS SQL translation, which has quite some usage. And it would be possible to just say, if we encounter the following select statement, do something completely different. And this is the power of EBMS SQL translation. I don't want to go into very much detail for that, just something to keep in mind. That
let's point out a couple of use cases for this. It's very, very powerful. So let's suppose that your company uses a third-party application. And you can't change the application. They've got some really bad SQL in there, but you can't change it. What you can do is actually take that SQL statement, if you can get hold of it, and you can do a SQL translation so their application stays the same. And it translates into a different SQL statement that runs correctly, runs faster, etc. It's also valuable when you're doing migrations from, let's say, a SQL Server world, where you need to support different kinds of syntax. And you'll take their SQL and convert it into SQL that will work properly in Oracle. So a couple of really interesting use cases.
That was why it was invented for, is that right?
Yes.
Especially for SQL Server migrations.
For migrations, yeah. But it's really, I think, particularly we hear a lot of complaints about people saying, oh, this third-party app that we got or this ORM writes terrible SQL, but we can change it. What can we do? This actually gives you a way to do that under the covers.
It's 12c, right? I'm not sure if it's 12.1 or 12.2, but it's somewhere in 12c.
Definitely by 12.1. I thought it might have even been in 11. I don't remember. But yeah, certainly with 12.1.
Okay. Well, that were the things I came up with how to break this code. But let's go back to.
That was very creative.
Yeah.
I never thought about translation, SQL translation.
Ah, okay. So I find something that you probably didn't
Absolutely
think about. So that was the example. Yeah, we can hack DBMS output, and as you already mentioned, the solution is put sys.dbms output in front of if we want to be sure of that, if we want to avoid that. The last thing I didn't know and only picked up on OTN because somebody complained about it is that when others does not capture all exceptions. I mean, it's called when others, but there are a certain number of exceptions that when others does not capture.
Yeah, I think they're fairly extreme circumstances. I think you'll see some like Aura 600s that will escape when others as well.
Yes. Yes.
But certainly from that
end of file and communication channel, if you have to like on a remote connection or so, I think that will go through as well.
Yeah. So for normal activity, the exception when others will trap pretty much any exception, but there are certain cases where it escapes. We have had users complaining bitterly about that and needing to change it. I know that we've been looking at it. I don't think there are any plans for modifying this right now. It's definitely a good thing to be aware of.
I totally like it, and I think it's quite correct. There are a few cases we have to look at the error message. It's not an everyday exception. It's the typical cases. We have like a Unix process and somebody presses Control Z, which is like cancel the current operation. And every process that gets this this kill command essentially should stop. And that's why I think it's quite correct that when others doesn't capture it. We can work around this. We can capture the exception ourselves. We can say say when E cancelled exception, then do something.
Just not the when others. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, that takes us right to the end of our hour. So while we do our sum up comments, please write in your questions if you have others. We've had a number of excellent comments and questions along the way. Any final thoughts in terms of PL SQL and our user community out there? And
well, I would say the most important thing about PL SQL is learning SQL. But the second next step is write your PL SQL in a way that allows other developers, like the future you or your colleague or whoever it is, to have an easily maintainable code base. And PL SQL provides all the things that are needed to do that.
Yeah, a lot of people are fairly dismissive, I think, of PL SQL these days, from the object-oriented world, the JavaScript world, functional programming world, because it's so simple. It seems like they can't even take it seriously, which to me is funny because that to me is one of the beautiful parts of PL SQL. Having a simple language to work with to do very important, powerful things and being able to write manageable, maintainable code is a plus. It's a feature, not a bug.
Totally agree.
All right. Well, on that note, I have no further questions. Thank you, Sven, so much for sharing your experience and your interesting take on a variety of features of PL SQL, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thanks, Steven, for having me on this talk, and good day to everybody.
Thank you both for being with us today, and thank you all for attending.